For 40 years, my wife Lorraine told me she was going to the bank every single Thursday to secure our future. She said she was building a nest egg for us so we could retire in Florida and watch the sunsets. I believed her. I loved her. I broke my back laying concrete and breathing in drywall dust for 12 hours a day to provide for her. But 2 days after she died, I walked into that same bank and found out the truth. She was not depositing money. She was erasing me. My name is Victor Sullivan. I am 72 years old, and according to the state of Illinois and the woman I slept next to for 4 decades, I have been dead since 2008. Before I tell you how a dead man is speaking to you right now, hit that like button if you believe betrayal hurts more when it comes from the people you would take a bullet for. And tell me in the comments, do you trust your spouse with your life savings? Because I did, and it cost me my life. It started at the teller window of the First National Bank on a Tuesday morning. The air conditioning was set too high, and the marble floors were cold, just like the funeral home I had just left. I was wearing my only black suit, the one I bought for my daughter's wedding 20 years ago. It was tight around the shoulders and smelled faintly of mothballs. My wife Lorraine had passed away on Sunday. A massive stroke. No goodbyes. No final words. Just gone. I was in a daze. My hands were rough and calloused from 50 years of construction work, but they were shaking as I reached into my wallet. I needed $5,000 for the casket, a mahogany one with brass handles. Lorraine deserved the best. She always liked nice things. I slid my debit card across the granite counter. The teller was a young woman with too much eyeliner and a bored expression. She took the card without looking at me. I watched her swipe it. Then she frowned. She swiped it again harder this time. She did not look at me. She looked at her screen, then her eyes darted to a button under the desk. She pressed it. "Sir, there is a problem with this card," she said. Her voice was trembling slightly. I tapped my knuckles on the glass. I am a patient man, but I was grieving, and I had a funeral director waiting for me. "Look, miss, I know there is money in there. My wife handled the finances, but I know we have over $300,000 saved. Just give me the cash so I can bury my wife." "Please wait here, sir," she said, and she took a step back from the window. Then I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was the security guard, a large man whose uniform was stretching at the seams. "Step away from the counter, sir," he grunted. I shook him off. I spent 40 years managing construction crews. I have built bridges and skyscrapers. I do not let boys in uniforms push me around. I shouted so everyone in the lobby could hear me. "I want to see the manager. I want Douglas. Douglas Thorne. He is a family friend. Get him out here now." The heavy oak door behind the counter opened. Douglas Thorne walked out. I breathed a sigh of relief. I had known this man for years. He had come to my backyard barbecues. He had eaten my ribs. He had drank my beer on the 4th of July. I expected him to hug me, to say, "Vic, I am so sorry about Lorraine." I expected him to fix this computer error so I could go mourn my wife, but he did not. Douglas stood there in his $3,000 Italian suit and looked at me like I was a stain on his expensive carpet. He adjusted his silk tie and signaled the guard to hold me tighter. "Douglas, tell this kid who I am," I pleaded. My voice cracked. "Tell him I need the money for Lorraine's funeral." Douglas sighed a long, bored sound. He walked up to the glass partition. He did not open the door to invite me in. He spoke to me through the speaker system like I was a criminal. "I do not know who you are," he said coldly. My jaw dropped. "Douglas, stop playing around. It is me. Vic. Vic Sullivan." Douglas reached into a manila folder he was carrying. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slapped it against the bulletproof glass. It faced me. It was not a bank statement. It was an official document with the state seal embossed on it. A death certificate. I squinted. My reading glasses were in the truck, but I saw the name clearly in bold black letters. Victor Sullivan. Cause of death, heart failure. Date of death, August 14th, 2008. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees felt weak. "This is a mistake," I stammered. "I am standing right here. I am Victor Sullivan. Touch me. I am alive." Douglas laughed. It was a cold, dry laugh that chilled me to the bone. "No, you are not," he said. "Victor Sullivan has been dead for 15 years. His accounts were closed and his assets were transferred to his widow. You are just a homeless drifter trying to use a dead man's identity to steal money." He turned to the teller. "Call the police. Tell them we have an identity thief in the lobby." Identity thief. The words hung in the air. I looked around. The other customers were staring at me. Some were filming with their phones. To them, I was just a crazy old man in an ill-fitting suit shouting at a bank manager. 2 police officers were already coming through the front door. The teller must have tripped the silent alarm immediately. They did not ask questions. They saw a screaming old man and a security guard struggling, and they reacted. "Get on the ground," one officer yelled, reaching for his taser. "I am not a criminal," I yelled back, but the security guard kicked the back of my knees. I crumbled to the cold floor. My hip hit the marble hard. Pain shot up my spine. They grabbed my arms and twisted them behind my back. I felt the cold steel of handcuffs bite into my wrists. I had never been arrested in my life. I was a foreman, a taxpayer, a church deacon. "Officer, please check my fingerprints," I begged as they hauled me up. "This man is lying." But Douglas just stood there behind the glass, smirking. He held the death certificate up one more time as if to taunt me. And that was when I saw it. My face was pressed against the glass as the officers shoved me toward the exit. My eyes focused on the bottom of that death certificate. There was a line for the witness, the person who identified the body, the person who swore under penalty of perjury that I was dead. I stopped struggling. The air left my lungs. The physical pain in my hip vanished, replaced by a sharp, agonizing knife in my heart. The signature was in elegant, looping cursive. I knew that handwriting better than my own. I had seen it on Valentine cards and grocery lists for 40 years. Lorraine Sullivan. It was her signature. My wife. The woman I had nursed through cancer scares. The woman I had given every paycheck to since 1980. She did not just die and leave me alone. She had killed me 15 years ago. She had looked a coroner in the eye and said I was dead while I was likely at work pouring concrete to pay for her new kitchen. Why, I whispered, but no one heard me. As the police dragged me out of the bank and into the blinding sunlight, I saw a black car pull up. My son Preston stepped out. I thought for a second he was there to save me. But he did not look at the police. He looked at Douglas through the bank window and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. And in that moment, as they shoved me into the back of the squad car, the terrible reality crashed down on me. I was not just a widower, I was a ghost, and my family had been waiting for me to die for a very long time. The steel door of the holding cell buzzed loudly and clicked open. I had been sitting on a cold metal bench for 3 hours, staring at the concrete floor and trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly turned upside down. A young officer stepped in and uncuffed me. He told me my bail had been posted and I was free to go. I rubbed my wrists where the metal had bitten into my skin and walked out into the fluorescent glare of the precinct lobby. My son Preston was standing there. He looked impeccable in a charcoal gray wool coat and a silk scarf. He was typing on his phone and did not even look up as I approached him. "Preston," I said, my voice raspy from dehydration. "Thank God you are here. That banker Douglas has lost his mind. He thinks I am dead. We need to go back there and sort this out." Preston slid his phone into his pocket and looked at me. His eyes were dry. There was no relief in his face, no grief for his mother, just a cold calculation that I had never seen before. "Let us go to the car, Dad," he said quietly. "We cannot talk here." I followed him out to the parking lot. The air was crisp and smelled of exhaust and city grit. He opened the passenger door of his black Mercedes SUV. I climbed in, sinking into the soft leather seat. It was warm inside and smelled of expensive cologne. For a fleeting second, I felt safe. This was my boy. The boy I had taught to throw a baseball. The boy whose college tuition I had paid for by working double shifts, pouring concrete in the freezing rain. He would fix this. Preston started the engine and pulled out into traffic. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to ask me how I was, or to tell me about the funeral arrangements. But he just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Son," I said, breaking the silence, "we need to go home. I need to get your mother's dress ready for the viewing, and we need to call a lawyer about Douglas." He showed the police a death certificate with my name on it. Preston did not turn his head. He merged onto the highway heading west away from our neighborhood. "It was not a mistake, Dad," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I frowned. "What do you mean it was not a mistake?" "Mom did it on purpose," he said. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What are you talking about?" Preston finally glanced at me, and his expression was one of annoyance, like he was explaining a simple math problem to a slow child. "You owed money, Dad. A lot of money. The IRS was coming for everything. $2 million in back taxes and penalties from those side jobs you did in the 90s. Mom found out about it 15 years ago. If she had not acted, they would have taken the house. They would have taken my college fund. They would have taken everything." I sat up straight, my heart pounding against my ribs. That is a lie. I never cheated on my taxes. I claimed every single dime. I have the boxes of returns in the attic to prove it. Preston shook his head. "You are senile, Dad. You do not remember. Mom saved us. She declared you dead to freeze the assets and transfer them to a trust. It was the only way to protect the family." I looked at him in horror. He was lying. I knew it in my gut. I was a foreman. I kept detailed logs of every bag of cement and every hour of labor. I was meticulous. But the way he said it so smoothly, so confidently, made the room spin. "So I have been living a lie for 15 years, I whispered. "And you knew. You knew the whole time." "I did what I had to do," Preston said, gripping the wheel tighter. "And now you have ruined it. Walking into that bank today was the stupidest thing you could have done. You triggered a federal alert. If you go back to the house, the marshals will be waiting to arrest you for tax evasion." "Then let them arrest me," I shouted, my anger finally boiling over. "I will tell them the truth. I will show them I am alive and I paid my share. Turn this car around, Preston. Take me home." Preston ignored me. He took an exit ramp that led toward the industrial district. The scenery changed from nice suburban lawns to rusted chain-link fences and abandoned warehouses. "We cannot go home, Dad," he said. "The house is already in probate. It is being seized. You do not exist anymore. You are a ghost, and ghosts do not own property." "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Somewhere safe," Preston said. "Somewhere you cannot cause any more trouble until I fix this mess." He pulled the car up to a large, grim building, surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. The sign out front was faded and peeling. Sunnyvale State Care Facility. It looked more like a prison than a home. The windows were barred. The grass was dead. I saw people in hospital gowns wandering aimlessly in the courtyard, staring at the ground. "No," I said, reaching for the door handle. "No, Preston. I am not going in there. That is a place for the indigent, for people with no family. I have a home. The door was locked. Child lock. I pounded on the glass. Preston put the car in park and turned to me. His face was hard as stone. You have no home, Dad. You have no money. You have no identity. You are John Doe. And John Doe is lucky I found him a bed because the alternative is a federal prison cell. He got out and walked around to my side. He opened the door and grabbed my arm. His grip was strong, younger than mine. He hauled me out of the car. My legs felt heavy. I tried to pull away, but he was relentless. He marched me up the concrete steps to the metal front door. The smell hit me the moment we stepped inside. Urine, bleach, boiled cabbage, and underneath it all the stale scent of despair. A nurse behind a plexiglass counter looked up. She did not smile. She looked at Preston, then at me, then back at Preston. "This is the admission," she asked, popping her gum. Preston nodded. He pulled a thick envelope out of his coat pocket and slid it across the counter. "Cash." I saw the green edges. "He is confused," Preston told her. "Dementia. He thinks he is a millionaire. He thinks he has a house. He gets agitated." "I am not agitated," I yelled. "I am Victor Sullivan. This is my son. He is kidnapping me. Call the police." The nurse rolled her eyes. "They all say that, honey. Sign here." Preston signed a paper. I tried to read it upside down. He did not sign his name. He signed a scribble that looked nothing like his signature. "Preston, please," I begged, grabbing his lapel. "Do not do this. I raised you. I bought you your first car. I held you when you had nightmares. Do not leave me in this hellhole." Preston pushed my hand away and dusted off his coat. He looked at the nurse. "He is a flight risk. Take his shoes." "What?" I gasped. Preston pointed at my feet, my black wingtips, the shoes I had worn to walk him down the aisle at his graduation, the shoes I kept polished for church. "He will run if he has shoes," Preston said, "and take his phone." The nurse came around the counter. She was a big woman with forearms like hams. She grabbed me and shoved me into a plastic chair. Before I could fight back, she ripped the shoes off my feet. Then she reached into my pocket and took my old smartphone. Preston stood by the door watching. He checked his watch. "I have a meeting," he said. He turned to leave. "Preston," I screamed. "Mom would never have wanted this." He stopped. He turned back slowly and walked close to me. He leaned down so his face was inches from mine. I could smell the mint on his breath. "Mom hated you, Dad," he whispered. "She hated your dirty work clothes. She hated your small life. She tolerated you because you brought home a paycheck. But now the paycheck has stopped. So do us both a favor." He paused and his eyes went dead. "Stay dead. Do not try to call anyone. Do not try to leave. Because if you make me come back here, if you make me deal with this again, I will make sure you die for real. And next time it will not be on paper." He straightened up, adjusted his scarf, and walked out the door without looking back. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my soul. I sat there in my socks on the cold linoleum floor, surrounded by the screams of strangers and the smell of death. I watched through the barred window as his black Mercedes pulled away, disappearing into the traffic. My son. My flesh and blood. He had not just dropped me off. He had discarded me like a broken tool he no longer needed. And as the nurse grabbed my arm to drag me to my room, I realized the terrifying truth. I was completely alone in a world that believed I did not exist. The room they shoved me in was a 12 by 12 box that smelled of stale urine and industrial bleach. My roommate was a man named Earl, who weighed 300 pounds and had been screaming at an invisible woman named Martha for the last 4 hours. Every time he screamed, spit flew from his mouth and landed on the linoleum floor that was already sticky with filth. I sat on the edge of the bare mattress, my back pressed against the cold cinder block wall, and watched him. I was not afraid of Earl. I had worked construction sites in the 70s where men settled disputes with hammers and crowbars. Earl was just a symptom of the hell my son had thrown me into, but he was also a ticking time bomb. It was 2 in the morning when Earl finally stopped screaming and started snoring, a sound like a chainsaw ripping through wet wood. I knew this was my only chance. I stood up, my knees popping audibly in the silence. My body ached. At 72 years old, sleeping on a thin mattress with no pillow was torture for my arthritis. But pain was a luxury I could not afford right now. I crept toward the door first, just to check. Locked from the outside. A small reinforced glass window let me see the hallway where a night nurse was dozing off at her station. There was no way out through the front. I turned my attention to the window on the far wall. It was covered with a heavy steel mesh security screen bolted into the frame to keep the crazies from jumping. To anyone else, it looked like a dead end. But I was not anyone else. I was Victor Sullivan. I had built skyscrapers in Chicago and bridges in Missouri. I knew how things were put together, and more importantly, I knew how they fell apart. I limped over to the window and ran my fingers along the frame. It was wood, old wood, painted over a dozen times with thick white lead paint, but underneath the layers I could feel the softness. Dry rot. The state didn't spend money on maintenance. They spent it on sedatives. The security screen was bolted into the wood, not the masonry. That was their mistake. I needed a tool. I looked around the barren room. Nothing but the beds and a plastic nightstand bolted to the floor. I knelt down by my bed frame. It was cheap metal held together by standard Phillips head screws. I worked my thumbnail into the groove of one of the loose screws. It was tight. I gritted my teeth and twisted. The metal bit into my nail bed, tearing the skin, but I didn't stop. I focused on the anger. The image of Preston driving away in his Mercedes. The image of Douglas smirking behind that glass. The rage gave me strength. With a final grunt, the screw gave way. I held the 2-inch screw in my hand like it was a key to the city. I went back to the window. I didn't try to unscrew the security bolts. I jammed the screw into the soft, rotting wood right next to the bottom bracket. I used it as a crude chisel, digging away the decayed timber. It was slow work. My hands cramped. My fingers bled. But inch by inch, the wood crumbled. Earl shifted in his sleep, mumbling about Martha and a shotgun. I froze. If he woke up and saw me, he would start screaming again, and the nurse would come running. I held my breath, counting the seconds, until his breathing returned to the chainsaw rhythm. I went back to work. After 20 minutes of digging, the bottom bracket was loose. I gripped the steel mesh with both hands and pulled. I put my back into it, ignoring the fire in my shoulders. With a groan of protest, the rusted screws ripped free from the rotten wood. The bottom of the screen swung out just enough for a man to squeeze through. I pushed the glass window up. It slid easily. I stuck my head out. The night air hit me like a bucket of ice water. It was fresh and clean compared to the stench inside. I looked down. We were on the 3rd floor, a 30-foot drop to the concrete loading dock below. To my right, running down the side of the building, was a drainage pipe. It was old cast iron, not the cheap PVC they use today. That was good. It could hold weight, but it was 4 feet away from the window ledge. I climbed onto the sill. My legs were shaking, not from fear, but from fatigue. I was an old man in hospital socks, standing on a ledge in the middle of the night. If I fell, I would break every bone in my body. Preston would win. He would get to bury me for real this time. No, I whispered to the wind. Not tonight. I took a deep breath and lunged. My hands grasped the cold iron of the pipe. The impact slammed my chest against the metal, knocking the wind out of me. I slid down a few inches, the rough iron scraping the skin off my palms, before I tightened my grip. I wrapped my legs around the pipe. I hung there for a moment, gasping for air. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down. The ground seemed miles away. I began the descent, hand over hand, foot over foot. Every movement was agony. My rotator cuff, which I had torn in '98, screamed in protest. My knees burned, but I kept moving. I thought about the bridges I had built, the I-90 overpass, the suspension cables. I trusted steel and stone. I did not trust flesh and blood. Not anymore. I was halfway down when a beam of light cut through the darkness. "Hey, who is that?" I looked down. A security guard was rounding the corner of the building, flashlight dancing on the walls. He hadn't seen me yet, but he would in seconds. I didn't have time to climb. I let go. I dropped the last 10 feet. I hit the top of a dumpster first, which broke my fall, then rolled onto the concrete. The impact jarred my teeth and sent a shockwave of pain up my spine. I lay there for a second, stunned, seeing stars. Over here. I heard something fall. The guard was running toward the dumpsters now. The beam of his flashlight swept over my head, missing me by inches. I scrambled to my feet, forcing my body to obey. I limped into the shadows of the loading dock. A large box truck was idling there, its back engine rumbling. It was a waste management truck, collecting the cafeteria swill. The back compactor was open. I had no choice. The guard was closing in. I could hear his boots on the pavement. I ran to the back of the truck. The smell hit me before I even touched it. A thick, cloying stench of rotting vegetables, sour milk, and meat that had turned. It made my stomach heave. I grabbed the hydraulic lever and pulled myself up. I threw myself into the dark cavern of the truck, landing on a pile of slimy garbage bags. Something soft and wet squelched beneath me. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve. Outside, I heard the guard's voice. Must have been a raccoon. I do not see anyone. I lay perfectly still, buried in the refuse of the place that was supposed to be my grave. The truck's hydraulics hissed. The back gate began to close. I crawled deeper into the pile toward the front of the container, praying the driver wouldn't turn on the compactor. The truck lurched forward. We were moving. I lay in the darknesses, surrounded by the stench of decay. Tears of rage and humiliation pricked my eyes. I was Victor Sullivan. I was a man of respect. I had led crews of 50 men. I had shaken hands with the mayor when we finished the downtown viaduct. And now I was hiding in a garbage truck covered in filth, escaping a prison built by my own son. But as the truck hit a pothole and I bounced against the steel wall, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't despair. It was clarity. They thought I was trash. They threw me away like yesterday's leftovers. But they forgot one thing. Trash is what you get rid of. I was not trash. I was the reinforced steel rod you forgot to remove from the foundation. I was the flaw in their design. I wiped the slime from my face with a trembling hand. "I am not dying like a rat," I whispered in the darkness. My voice was low and guttural, a growl from the deepest part of my soul. I built the roads this truck is driving on. I poured the concrete for the bank that stole my money. I built this city, and I will tear it down brick by brick if I have to, until I find the truth. The truck sped up, carrying me away from Sunnyvale, away from the cage and into the unknown night. I closed my eyes and let the anger warm me. The Victor Sullivan, who trusted his wife and loved his son, had died in that nursing home. The man who climbed out of the garbage truck was something else entirely. And he had work to do. It was 3 a.m. when I finally stood in the shadows of the old oak tree I had planted 40 years ago. My house looked exactly the same as I had left it, but it felt like a stranger's fortress. The windows were blazing with light, and the driveway was full of cars I did not recognize. Expensive cars. Porches and BMWs parked on the driveway I had paved with my own sweat. I was shivering not just from the cold, but from the layer of filth covering me. I smelled like rotting cabbage and betrayal. I wanted to march up the front steps and kick the door down, but I knew that was a death sentence. To the world, I was a ghost, and ghosts do not knock. I made my way to the side of the house near the wrap-around porch. When I built this place in '82, I had installed a hidden access panel behind the lattice work, just in case the pipes ever froze in the winter. Lorraine used to complain that I was paranoid about maintenance. Now that paranoia was the only thing keeping me alive. I pried the lattice loose with trembling fingers. It groaned softly, but the sound was drowned out by the thumping bass of music coming from inside. I squeezed my body into the dark, narrow crawl space beneath the house. The smell hit me instantly. Damp earth, fiberglass insulation, and the scent of the cedar beams I had cut myself. It was the smell of my life's work. I crawled on my elbows, dragging my bad leg through the dirt. Above me, the floorboards creaked under the weight of dozens of people. Dust rained down on my face with every step they took. I knew exactly where I was going. There was a floor vent in the main living room right next to the fireplace. I had installed the heating system myself, ensuring the airflow was perfect. I positioned myself directly under the metal grate and looked up. The view was fragmented by the metal slats, but I could see them clearly. My living room had been transformed. The furniture I loved, the recliner where I watched football, the coffee table where I did puzzles with Preston, was gone. In its place were sleek white sofas and glass tables that looked cold and uninviting. The room was full of people holding champagne flutes, but my eyes locked on the two men standing in front of the fireplace. Douglas Thorne and my son Preston. They were laughing. A deep, hearty laugh that vibrated through the floorboards and into my chest. Douglas was holding a glass of amber liquid, probably my 20-year-old scotch, that I was saving for a special occasion. He looked flushed, victorious. Preston stood next to him, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him. To the new beginning, Douglas announced, raising his glass. To freedom, Preston replied, clinking his glass against Douglas's. I watched as Douglas reached out and wrapped his arm around Preston's waist, pulling him close. It was not the way a family friend holds a young man. It was possessive, intimate. He squeezed Preston's hip, and Preston leaned into the touch, comfortable and familiar. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. I had always wondered why Preston looked nothing like me, why he had Douglas's sharp nose and thin lips instead of my square jaw. I had pushed those thoughts away for years, telling myself I was crazy. But seeing them now, the resemblance was undeniable. "You did good, Kid," Douglas said, his voice dripping with pride. "You handled the old man perfectly. Sunnyvale is a hole. He won't last a week." Preston took a sip of his drink. "I almost felt bad for a second," he said. "But then I remembered the accounts. When do we get access to the offshore funds?" Douglas chuckled. "Patience. We have to wait for the probate period to clear. But do not worry. Your mother left everything set up perfectly." I pressed my face closer to the vent, straining to hear. "She was a genius," Douglas continued. "Every Thursday for 40 years, she walked into my bank with cash. Vic thought she was putting it into a savings account for their golden years. The poor idiot thought he was building a nest egg." He took a long drink and wiped his mouth. He was handing me his union pension, Preston. Every single dime of overtime. Every hazard pay bonus. He broke his back pouring concrete, and she walked it right into my office, and we funneled it into the shell companies. The Blue Water Development Group, the Horizon Trust, all fake, all ours. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop the scream that was rising in my throat. My pension. The money I had worked double shifts for. The money I had missed birthdays and anniversaries to earn. It wasn't just tax evasion. It was theft. Pure, calculated theft. They had been bleeding me dry for decades, laughing at me while I came home covered in dust and exhausted. And the best part, Preston said, smiling, is that he thinks he is a criminal. He thinks he is running from the IRS. Exactly, Douglas said. Fear is a powerful motivator. He will stay hidden. He will rot in that hole or on the streets, and eventually he will just fade away. And we will be sitting on a beach in the Caymans with his $3 million. Douglas pulled Preston into a hug, kissing him on the temple. "I am proud of you, son," he whispered. "Son." The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He didn't say it like a figure of speech. He said it like a father. I felt tears streaming down my face, cutting through the grime on my cheeks. My entire life was a lie. My wife was a con artist. My son was not my son. And the man I thought was my friend had been sleeping in my bed and spending my money for 40 years. I wanted to die. Right there in the dirt under the floorboards, I wanted to just stop breathing. Suddenly, I heard a clicking sound on the hardwood floor above. Tip, tap, tip, tap. It was Buster, my golden retriever. He was 14 years old, blind in one eye, and riddled with arthritis. He was the only living thing in this house that had ever shown me unconditional love. I saw his paws through the grate. He stopped right above me. He lowered his snout to the metal vent. I froze. If he barked, if he made a scene, Douglas would send the police or worse. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Buster took a deep sniff, then another. I waited for the growl. I waited for the bark that would end my life, but it never came. Through the slats I saw his tail. It started to thump, 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 thump against the floor. A slow, rhythmic beat. He whimpered softly, a sound so low only I could hear it. He knew. He smelled the sawdust and the sweat and the old spice that was unmistakably me. He pressed his wet nose against the cold metal, trying to get closer to the master he thought was gone. I reached up and pressed my dirty fingers against the grate directly under his nose. "Shh, boy," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I am here, buddy, I am here." Buster let out a long sigh and laid down right on top of the vent, blocking the view of the men who were celebrating my death. He rested his chin on the grate, guarding me, protecting me. I lay there in the darkness, weeping silently into the dirt. A dog had more loyalty in his little finger than my entire family had in their whole bodies. And as I lay there, listening to the beat of his tail, I made a promise. I would not fade away. I would not rot. I would take back every single cent they stole. Not for me, but for the man I used to be. The man they killed. Victor Sullivan was dead, but the thing living under the floorboards was just getting started. I waited until the music died down, and the last of the expensive sports cars roared out of the driveway, leaving only silence and the smell of exhaust fumes hanging in the night air. My body was screaming in protest as I dragged myself out from under the porch. My knees were raw and bleeding, and the dirt from the crawl space had turned into mud with my sweat. I stood up in the shadows of the azalea bushes, trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer magnitude of the hatred burning in my gut. I looked at my house one last time. It was dark now. Preston and Douglas had probably passed out drunk on the furniture I had paid for. I turned my back on the house and limped toward the detached garage. It was a 3-car structure I had built with my own hands, framing the roof on weekends, while Lorraine sat in a lawn chair drinking lemonade and telling me I was working too hard. The main garage doors were closed, housing Preston's Mercedes and whatever luxury sedan Douglas was driving. But around the back, parked in the weeds under a tarp that was half rotted away, sat my old friend, my 1998 Ford F-150. It was rusted around the wheel wells, and the blue paint was peeling like a sunburn, but to me it was beautiful. It was the truck that had hauled the lumber for our first home. It was the truck that had carried Preston to his little league games. And it was the only thing on this property that Douglas and Preston had not sold. To them, it was just a piece of junk, an eyesore. They had probably left it there because they did not want to pay the towing fee to have it scrapped. I pulled the tarp off, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The truck sat there looking tired but resilient. just like me. I tried the door handle. Locked. Of course, well, Lorraine was always obsessed with locking things, even garbage. I did not have my keys. They were in a plastic bag at the nursing home, but I did not need keys. I grabbed a piece of stiff wire from a pile of garden scraps near the fence. My hands were shaking, but muscle memory took over. I slid the wire between the window and the weather-stripping feeling for the linkage rod. Click. The lock popped up. I opened the door, and the smell hit me. Old motor oil, stale coffee, and sawdust. The smell of my life. I climbed into the cab. The seat springs creaked, familiar and welcoming. I sat there for a moment, running my hand over the cracked steering wheel. I needed proof. I needed something that would stand up in court. And I knew exactly where to look. Lorraine had a habit. A tic, really. Whenever she was hiding something, she would put it in the one place she knew I would never clean. My truck. She used to borrow it on Thursdays, saying she needed to haul some old clothes to the donation center. She would come back hours later, and the truck would be exactly as I left it. Or so I thought. I reached down to the floor on the passenger side. The carpet was stained with grease and mud. I pulled the floor mat aside, revealing the metal floorboard. It looked solid, but I knew better. 10 years ago, Lorraine had asked me to weld a small lockbox into the floor of the truck. She told me it was for my tools, so nobody would steal them at job sites. I had thought it was a thoughtful gesture. I had thanked her. I had kissed her. I had spent a whole Saturday cutting the steel and welding the box flush with the frame so it was invisible under the carpet. I never used it. It was too small for my drills, but Lorraine used it. I had seen her once slipping a thick envelope under the mat before she thought I was watching. I felt around the edge of the carpet until my fingers found the hidden latch I had installed. It was rusted, stuck. I leaned over, grabbing a tire iron from behind the seat. I jammed it into the seam and pried with all my strength. "Come on, old girl," I grunted. "Open up for me." The metal groaned, and then with a sharp snap, the lid popped open. I pulled out my phone, which had a cracked screen, but still had a sliver of battery left from when I charged it at the nursing home before the nurse took it. Wait, I did not have my phone. The nurse took it. I cursed silently. I had to use the dome light. I reached up and flicked the switch. A dim yellow light filled the cab. The box was not empty. Inside, there was no cash. There were no jewels. There was just a single heavy metal box painted matte black. It was a fireproof document safe, the kind you buy to protect deeds and wills. It was locked. I looked at the lock. It was a simple 3-digit combination. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I tried Preston's birthday. The dial spun uselessly. Then I remembered. The day I proposed to her. June 4th, 1978. 6:04. Click. The latch sprang open. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside sat a thick leather-bound ledger. The leather was worn and cracked with age. It smelled of her perfume. Lavender and deception. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was hers. Neat, precise, methodical. January 5th, 1983. $500. Delivered to Douglas. I turned the page. March 10th, 1990. $2,000. Delivered to Douglas. I flipped through the years. The numbers got bigger. August 14th, 2008. The day I died on paper. $10,000. Delivered to Douglas. I scanned the rows of figures. It was a complete accounting of every single dollar she had stolen from me. She had listed the source of the funds next to each entry. Overtime pay, holiday bonus, disability settlement, insurance dividend. I did the math in my head as I flipped to the back. The total was written on the very last page in red ink. $3,240,000. I stared at the number. 3 million. That was not just money. That was my life. That was the vacations we never took. That was the boat I never bought. That was the college tuition I thought I could not afford, so Preston had to take out loans which I paid off later. It was 40 years of sweat and blood condensed into ink on a page. But it was the note written underneath the final total that made my blood run cold. It was dated last Thursday, 3 days before she died. The entry read, "This Thursday is the last time. I am done being his cash cow. I told Douglas that if he does not return the principal plus interest by the end of the month, I will activate Box 404. He thinks I am bluffing. He thinks I destroyed the evidence of what we did to Victor. He is wrong." I sat back against the seat, breathing hard. Box 404. What was in Box 404? It had to be leverage. Lorraine was a calculator. She never did anything without a backup plan. If she was threatening Douglas, she had something on him, something worse than theft, something worse than fraud. I looked out the windshield. The first gray light of dawn was starting to creep over the horizon. I was sitting in a stolen truck in my own driveway, holding the evidence of a lifetime of betrayal. But this ledger was not enough. It proved she gave him money, but Douglas could claim it was a gift. He could claim it was investment losses. I needed the smoking gun. I needed whatever was in Box 404, and I knew where to find it. Box 404. It sounded like a safety deposit box number. Lorraine went to the bank every Thursday. The same bank where Douglas was the manager. The same bank that had thrown me out in handcuffs. I closed the ledger and tucked it inside my jacket. I grabbed the tire iron. It was heavy and cool in my hand. A weapon and a tool. "I am coming for you, Douglas," I whispered to the empty cab. "And this time I am not coming to make a deposit." I reached under the dash and hot-wired the ignition just like I had taught myself to do when I lost my keys on a job site in '89. The engine of the old Ford coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. It sounded angry. It sounded like retribution. I shifted into reverse and backed out of the weeds. I did not turn on the headlights. I rolled down the driveway, past the silent house, past the sleeping traders, and out onto the street. As I drove away, leaving the life I knew behind for good, I felt a strange sense of peace. The Victor Sullivan who built houses was gone. The man driving this truck was a demolition expert, and I was about to bring their whole world crashing down. The neon sign of the Rusty Spoon Diner flickered with a dying buzz that matched exactly how I felt inside. It was 2 a.m, and the rain had started to fall, turning the grime of the city streets into a slick, black mirror. I parked the stolen truck in the alley behind the kitchen, where the shadows were deepest. My stomach growled a hollow, painful sound, reminding me I had not eaten since the funeral home. But food was not the priority. I needed a brain. I had the brawn. I had the rage. I had the evidence. But I did not know how to weaponize a leather book full of numbers against a man who owned the vault. I needed Sarah Jenkins. I watched her through the grease-stained window. She was the only waitress on shift, wiping down the counter with methodical, tired movements. She looked older than 28. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of cheap makeup could hide. It broke my heart to see her like this. Sarah was brilliant. She was the daughter of my best friend Joe, who died on a rig 10 years ago. I had promised Joe I would look out for her. I had helped pay for her accounting degree. She was supposed to be a forensic auditor at a top firm in Chicago, not pouring coffee for truckers and drunks at 2 a.m. But she had made the mistake of being honest in a city that ran on corruption. I pulled my collar up and pushed open the door. A little bell chimed announcing my arrival. The diner was empty except for an old man sleeping in the back booth. Sarah did not look up immediately. Just sit anywhere, Han, she said, her voice flat. I will be with you in a minute. I did not sit. I walked straight to the counter and sat on a spinning stool directly in front of her. The smell of brewing coffee and bacon grease was overwhelming. Hello, Sarah, I said softly. She froze. The rag in her hand stopped moving. She knew that voice. She had heard it at her father's barbecues. She had heard it at her graduation. She had heard it when I called to check on her after she lost her license. She slowly lifted her head. When her eyes met mine, the color drained from her face so fast, I thought she was going to faint. She dropped the rag. Her hands flew to her mouth and she stumbled back, knocking over a stack of plastic cups. Mr. Sullivan, she whispered. Her eyes were wide with terror. Oh my God. I saw the obituary. I saw it in the paper. Douglas told me you died of a heart attack. I am not a ghost, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice low. And I did not have a heart attack, although my family certainly tried their best to give me one. She reached out a trembling hand and touched my sleeve as if to verify I was solid matter. When she felt the rough fabric of the old suit jacket, she let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. You are alive, she said. But how? Why? The police report said. The police report is a lie, I interrupted. The death certificate is a lie. My funeral is a lie. The only thing real in this world right now, Sarah, is that I am sitting here, and I am in a lot of trouble. She looked around the empty diner, then poured me a mug of black coffee without asking. She knew how I took it. She leaned over the counter, her voice dropping to a conspirator's whisper. Does anyone know you are here? Just you, I said, taking a sip of the hot, bitter liquid. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. And the people who are trying to bury me. Sarah narrowed her eyes. The fear was replaced by a spark of intelligence. The sharp, analytical mind I remembered was waking up. It is Douglas, isn't it? She asked. It has to be. He is the only one with the connections to fake a death record that fast. I nodded. He and Preston. They put me in a state home, Sarah. They told everyone I was dead so they could loot my accounts. Sarah slammed her hand down on the counter. I knew it. I knew that snake was dirty. That is why I lost my license, Vic. I found discrepancies in his bank's ledger 2 years ago. High-risk transfers to shell companies. When I reported it, he destroyed me. He planted evidence that I was embezzling. He took my career, my reputation, everything. And now he takes your life. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the black ledger. I placed it on the sticky countertop between us. It looked out of place among the ketchup bottles and napkin dispensers. He did not just take my life, Sarah. He took my wife. Or maybe she gave herself to him. I do not know anymore. But this is what I found. Sarah opened the book. Her eyes scanned the pages. At first she looked confused, but as she turned the pages faster, her expression changed to pure professional awe. She was reading the language of theft, and she was fluent in it. My God, Vic, she murmured, running her finger down a column of numbers. This is not just theft. This is structuring. See these amounts. $9,000, $9,500. Always just under the $10,000 reporting limit. Lorraine was smurfing your money into the banking system to avoid federal flags. She flipped to the back of the book. 3.2 million, she read aloud. She looked up at me. Vic, do you realize what this is? This is not just a ledger. This is a confession. If Lorraine kept this, she was the bagman. She was moving cash into the bank, and Douglas was washing it through his commercial real estate loans. Can we use it? I asked. Can we send them to jail? Sarah bit her lip. It is strong evidence, but it is handwritten. Douglas will claim it is a forgery. He will claim Lorraine was senile. We need to link this money to an actual account. We need to see where the money went after it hit the bank. She looked at the clock on the wall. Then she did something that made me smile for the first time in 2 days. She took off her apron and threw it on the floor. "My shift ends in 10 minutes, but I quit," she said. "I have a laptop in my bag. It is old, but it works." We moved to the back booth where the shadows hit us from the street. Sarah booted up a battered laptop covered in stickers. She cracked her knuckles and started typing. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She was not just accessing public records, she was navigating the back doors of the financial world she used to police. "I'm going to check the bank's public filings," she said, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "If Douglas thinks you are dead, he might be getting sloppy. He might be trying to move the assets quickly." I watched her work, feeling a surge of pride. This was Joe's daughter. She was a fighter. "Got you," she whispered after a few minutes of intense silence. "What is it?" I asked, leaning in. "Look at this." Sarah pointed to a complex chart on the screen. "Douglas announced a merger yesterday morning, 12 hours after your supposed death. He is selling the First National branch to a massive conglomerate called Omnicorp. But here is the kicker. Before the sale goes through, he is liquidating the bad assets to clean up the books." "Bad assets," I repeated. "That is you, Vic," she said, looking me in the eye. "And the shell companies Lorraine set up. He is dissolving the Blue Water Development Group and the Horizon Trust. He is cashing out." "Where's the money going?" I asked, my hands balling into fists. Sarah typed a few more commands. A map appeared on the screen. A line of red light traced a path from Chicago to New York and then down to a cluster of islands in the Caribbean. "Cayman Islands," she said. "He is moving it to an offshore account in the Caymans. Once it crosses that border, Vic, it is gone. We will never get it back. The transfer is scheduled to finalize on Friday morning." "Friday," I said. "That is 2 days from now." Sarah nodded grimly. "But there is something else. To authorize a transfer of that size, especially from a trust that has been dormant, he needs 2 forms of authentication. One is his digital key, which he has. The other—" She trailed off, typing furiously. "The other is a physical override," she said. "A fail-safe. It is usually kept in the most secure part of the bank. If he initiates the transfer on Friday morning, he will need to physically insert a master key into the server in the vault." "The vault," I whispered. "Box 404. Sarah looked at me sharp. "What did you say?" "The note in the ledger," I explained. "Lorraine wrote that if Douglas did not pay her back, she would activate Box 404. Sarah sat back in the booth, her mind racing. Box 404 is not just a safety deposit box, Vic. In the banking world, 404 is the error code for not found. It is a ghost box. It is where they hide the things that are not supposed to exist. If Lorraine has a box with that number, it is likely inside the high net worth vault. And if Douglas is moving the money, he will need to access that vault to clear the accounts. So we have to get into that vault before Friday morning," I said. Sarah closed the laptop. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning with a fierce determination. "Vic, getting into that vault is impossible. It has biometric scanners, armed guards, and a time lock." "I am a construction worker, Sarah," I said, leaning forward. "I know that building. I poured the foundation for that vault in 1985. I know where the air ducts are. I know how thick the walls are. And I know that every building has a weak point." Sarah looked at me for a long moment. She saw the man who had lost everything. She saw the ghost who had crawled out of a garbage truck to find her. And she saw her chance to take down the man who had ruined her life. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was strong. "We are not just going to get into that vault," she said. "We are going to empty it. But we cannot do it as a dead man and a waitress. We need a cover." "What kind of cover?" I asked. "If Douglas is selling the bank, he is looking for investors. she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. He is desperate to pump up the valuation before the sale. He is greedy, Vic, and greed makes people blind. We are going to give him exactly what he wants. A whale. A wealthy, eccentric investor who wants to buy his toxic assets. I looked down at my dirty suit and my calloused hands. I do not look like a whale, Sarah. I look like a majestic hobo. Sarah laughed. It was a dry, nervous sound, but it was real. Leave that to me, she said. My ex-boyfriend runs the costume department at the City Theater. We are going to give you a makeover, Victor Sullivan. By the time I am done with you, Douglas won't see the man he betrayed. He will only see dollar signs. She stood up and grabbed her bag. Let us go, she said. We have 48 hours to pull off the biggest heist this city has ever seen. And Vic, if we get caught, we are not going to jail. We are going straight to the morgue. I stood up and followed her out into the rainy night. I did not care about the risks. I was already dead, and dead men have nothing left to lose. We walked to my truck, the rain washing away the smell of the nursing home, ready to build a lie strong enough to break the truth wide open. We sat in the cab of my rusted truck, with the rain drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof. The only light came from the glow of Sarah's laptop screen, which she had balanced on her knees. The smell of old coffee and wet wool filled the small space, but my attention was fixed entirely on the spiderweb of lines and numbers she was pulling up. It looked like a map of a subway system, but every station was a bank account, and every train was my money moving further and further away from me. Sarah stopped typing and pointed to a cluster of transactions. Her finger traced a pattern that made my stomach turn. Look at this, Vic, she said quietly. Look at the dates and the amounts. August 3rd, $9,500. August 10th, $9,800. August 17th, $9,200. I squinted at the screen. I see them, I said. It is just numbers, Sarah. What does it mean? It means Lorraine was smarter than we thought, she said, and much more dangerous. In the banking world, we call this smurfing. It is a technique used by drug cartels and human traffickers. The federal limit for reporting a cash deposit is $10,000. Anything over that, and the bank has to file a currency transaction report with the Treasury Department. It raises flags. It leaves a paper trail. She looked at me, her eyes dark with intensity. Lorraine knew the limit, Vic. She kept every single deposit just under the radar. For 40 years, she walked into that bank and handed Douglas thousands of dollars in cash, and because it was under 10 grand, no one asked questions. No forms were signed. It was invisible money. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Invisible money, I whispered. But where did it go? You said it went to shell companies. Sarah nodded and tapped a few keys. A new window popped up. It was a list of registered business entities. This is where it gets sick, she said. Douglas did not just put the money in his pocket. That would be too easy to trace. He created a network of fake construction companies to wash the cash. He made it look like legitimate business income. And guess who the registered owner is? I leaned closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected to see a fake name, or maybe Preston's name. But there it was in black and white. Sullivan Heavy Industries, VS Concrete Solutions, Victor's Paving and Foundations. My name was everywhere. I sat back against the torn seat, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. They used my name, I said, my voice trembling. Why? Why would they use my name if I am supposed to be dead? Because you are the perfect scapegoat, Sarah said grimly. She turned the laptop so I could see the incorporation documents. They were dated back to the 80s, long before the fake death certificate. Think about it, Vic, she continued. If the IRS ever catches on, If the FBI ever investigates these shady companies, who do they find? They do not find Douglas. He is just the banker processing the transactions. They do not find Preston. He is just a beneficiary. They find Victor Sullivan, the owner, the operator, the man who supposedly deposited all this cash. But I am dead, I protested. Exactly, Sarah said. And that is the brilliance of it. If the heat ever got too high, if the regulators ever started sniffing around Douglas could just shrug and say he was a victim too. He could say he did not know the companies were fronts. He could point to the death certificate and say the criminal mastermind died years ago, closing the case. Or worse. Worse, I asked. Sarah hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. Or if you ever tried to come back. If you ever tried to reclaim your life like you are doing now. They have a 40-year paper trail proving that you are a money launderer. Douglas could flip the script instantly. He could say you faked your own death to avoid prosecution for these crimes. He could paint you as the villain who has been hiding out for 15 years while your poor wife tried to clean up your mess. I stared out the windshield into the dark, rainy night. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. This was not just theft. This was an assassination. Lorraine had not just stolen my money. She had stolen my integrity. She had taken the one thing I valued more than anything, my good name, and she had turned it into a shield for her crimes. She had built a trap so elaborate that even if I survived, even if I escaped the nursing home, I would walk straight into a prison cell. She hated me, I whispered. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. She did not just use me, Sarah. She hated me. You do not do this to someone you love. You do not set them up to take the fall for federal crimes unless you despise them. I thought back to all the nights I came home tired and aching, and she would kiss my cheek and tell me I was a good provider. I thought about the times she encouraged me to take extra shifts, saying we needed to save for the future. She was not saving for our future. She was building the walls of my prison, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. And if we go to the police now, Sarah said softly, interrupting my thoughts. If we walk into a precinct with this ledger, Douglas will just hand them these files. He will say the ledger is yours, that it is your record of your illegal activities. And since you are the one who has been missing for 15 years, who do you think they will believe? The respected bank director or the man who technically does not exist? I felt a surge of rage so pure and hot, it almost blinded me. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. So I am trapped, I said. If I stay dead, they keep my money. If I come alive, I go to jail for their crimes. Sarah closed the laptop with a snap. Only if we play by their rules, she said. But we are not going to do that. We are going to use their own weapon against them. What do you mean? I asked, looking at her. Sarah smiled, a dangerous, sharp smile that reminded me of her father when he was about to win a poker hand. Douglas set these companies up in your name, Vic. That means legally you own them. You own the accounts. You own the assets. He thinks that is his safety net because you are dead, but you are sitting right here. She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. We are going to verify your identity, she said. Not with the police, but with the system. We are going to walk into that bank as Arthur King, the wealthy investor. But once we are in that vault, once we get our hands on the physical key, we are not just going to stop the transfer. We are going to redirect it. Redirect it where I asked. To the only legitimate account Victor Sullivan has left, Sarah said. The one they forgot about because it had zero balance. Your old union pension fund. I looked at her stunned. Can you do that? I asked. Sarah patted the laptop. With the key from the vault and my code, yes. We can drain every single one of those fake companies. We can strip Douglas and Preston clean in 10 seconds. But Vic, we have to be precise. If we trigger the alarm before the transfer is complete, the accounts lock down and we lose everything. I nodded slowly. The despair I felt a moment ago was being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Lorraine had spent 40 years building a lie to destroy me. I would spend the next 48 hours tearing it down. Let them think I am the villain. I said, my voice low and steady. Let them think I am the criminal. Because when I am done with them, they are going to wish they had just killed me for real. Sarah started the truck engine. The wipers slapped against the glass, clearing the view. We have a lot of work to do, she said. We need to turn a dead construction worker into a billionaire by tomorrow morning. You better get some sleep, Vic. You have a big performance ahead of you. I closed my eyes as the truck pulled out into the rain. I knew I would not sleep. I could see Lorraine's face in the darkness, her smile, her lies. And for the first time in 40 years, I did not see my wife. I saw the enemy, and I was ready for war. The rain was still hammering against the roof of the truck, but inside the cab, the only thing that mattered was the grainy black and white footage on Sarah's laptop screen. She had managed to crack the bank's archival server using a backdoor password she remembered from her auditing days. It was a risky move that could trigger an alarm if we stayed connected too long, but we needed to see exactly what Lorraine had been doing every Thursday for the last 4 decades. Sarah typed a command, and the video player loaded a file dated 2 weeks ago. The timestamp read, Thursday, 9:15 in the morning. There she was. My breath caught in my throat as I saw my wife walk through the bank's revolving doors. She was wearing her favorite beige trench coat, the one I bought her for Christmas 5 years ago. But she did not look like the frail woman who complained about her aching joints at home. On the screen, she moved with a purpose. She walked straight past the teller line, where the regular people stood waiting to deposit their paychecks. She did not even glance at the counter. Instead, she headed directly for the glass office at the back of the lobby. Douglas Thorne came out to meet her. He did not shake her hand like a banker greeting a client. He touched her elbow, a small, intimate gesture that made my skin crawl. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. It was a laugh I had not heard in years, a laugh reserved for conspirators. Sarah fast-forwarded the footage. They are not going to his office, Sarah whispered, pointing at the screen. Look, she was right. Douglas led Lorraine past his office and down a hallway that was restricted to the public. They stopped at a heavy steel elevator door that required a key card. Douglas swiped his card, and the doors opened. Where does that go? I asked. The basement, Sarah said, but not the regular safety deposit box vault. That is on the main level. The basement is the high net worth vault. It is for clients with assets over $10 million. It is climate controlled and has biometric security. I stared at the screen. $10 million. My wife was walking into a vault designed for oil tycoons and celebrities while I was clipping coupons for groceries. The video switched to a camera inside the vault. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling steel lockers. It looked like a morgue for money. Douglas led Lorraine to the far wall. He stopped in front of a box that was larger than the others. The number painted in gold on the steel face was 404. Box 404, I said. The ghost box. Sarah paused the video. Watch closely, Vic, she said. This is the problem. On the screen, Douglas pulled a long brass key from his jacket pocket. He inserted it into the left keyhole of the box, but he did not turn it. He waited. Lorraine reached into her purse. She pulled out a velvet pouch, and from it she took a silver key. She inserted it into the right keyhole. They turned the keys simultaneously. The heavy steel door clicked open. I leaned back against the seat, feeling defeated. 2 keys, I said. Standard protocol for high-security vaults, Sarah explained. It is a dual control system. The bank holds the guard key, and the client holds the renter key. Neither key can open the box alone. You need both to disengage the lock. So we are screwed, I said, rubbing my temples. We do not have Lorraine's key. The nurse took my personal effects, but she never gave me a key. Lorraine must have hidden it, or maybe she destroyed it to keep the secret safe. Sarah bit her lip, thinking. If we do not have the client key, we cannot open that box. And if we cannot open the box, we cannot get the leverage on Douglas, and we definitely cannot access the terminal inside to redirect the funds. The data port is inside the locker itself to prevent remote hacking. There has to be a way, I said. I am a builder, Sarah. If I lose a key to a house I am building, I do not burn the house down. I drill the lock. We cannot drill a bank vault, Vic, Sarah said, shaking her head. The vibration sensors would bring the police in 3 minutes. We need a key. I looked at the frozen image of Douglas on the screen. He looked so smug, so in control. He had the guard key. He had access to everything. And then a thought struck me. A memory from a job site years ago when a foreman lost the master key to a secure equipment shed. Does the bank have a spare? I asked. Sarah looked at me. What do you mean? If a client loses their key, does the bank have a copy? I asked. Sarah hesitated. Technically, yes. For legal reasons, the bank has to be able to access the boxes in case of a court order, or if the renter dies and the estate needs to be probated. But that key is kept in a sealed envelope in the main safe. It requires the signature of 2 bank officers and a notary to access it. Douglas cannot just grab it. But Douglas is the director, I argued, and he is selling the bank. He is desperate. He is cutting corners. Sarah's eyes widened. You are right. If he is liquidating assets, he might have already pulled the master keys to audit the boxes before the sale. But even if he has the master key, he won't use it for us. He thinks the box is occupied by Lorraine. He thinks it contains blackmail material. He will never open it for a stranger. Then we do not ask him to open it for a stranger, I said. We make him think he has to open it. I looked at Sarah, and for the first time I saw the plan clearly. It was dangerous. It was insane. But it was the only card we had left to play. We are going in as Arthur King, the diamond investor, right? I asked. Sarah nodded. Arthur King is going to demand a specific box, I said. He is going to tell Douglas that he is superstitious, that he only stores his diamonds in boxes with the number 4 because it is lucky in some culture. Or maybe he says he needs a large box, and box 404 is the only one that fits the dimensions of his case. Sarah started to smile. And when Douglas says the box is taken, she said, catching on Arthur King is going to offer him double the rental rate. He is going to wave a check for $100,000 under Douglas's greedy nose. Exactly, I said. Douglas knows Lorraine is dead. He knows I am supposed to be dead. In his mind, that box is now a liability. It is just sitting there holding evidence that could ruin him. If a billionaire walks in and offers him a fortune for that specific spot, Douglas will want to clear it out. He will want to open it, get rid of the blackmail material, and sell the space to the new sucker. But he won't open it in front of Arthur King, Sarah warned. He will want to do it privately. That is where we push him, I said. Arthur King is an eccentric billionaire. He is impatient. He does not trust banks. He wants to inspect the box immediately to make sure it is clean and secure before he hands over the money. We force him to use his override key right there in the moment. We appeal to his greed and his arrogance. He thinks he can outsmart everyone. He won't suspect that the old man in the expensive suit is actually the husband he betrayed. Sarah looked back at the laptop screen. She typed a few commands and downloaded the layout of the vault. It is a long shot, Vic, she said. If he refuses, if he calls security. It is over, he won't refuse. I said, my voice hard. He is drowning, Sarah. He is selling the bank because he is in trouble. He needs cash. He needs a win. When Arthur King walks in smelling like old money, Douglas won't see a risk. He will see a lifeline, and he will use that master key to grab it. I looked at my hands. They were still stained with the grease of the truck and the dirt of the crawl space. "We need to get cleaned up," I said. "If I'm going to play a billionaire, I cannot smell like a garbage truck." Sarah closed the laptop. "My friend at the theater has the suit," she said. "He also has a wig and some theatrical makeup. We can make you look 10 years younger or 10 years older." "Make me look like money," I said, starting the engine. "Make me look like the kind of man who buys banks for breakfast." As we drove away from the alley, the rain began to let up. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement like scattered diamonds. I was scared. I would not deny that. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer. But beneath the fear was a cold, steady anger. Douglas Thorne had used keys to lock me out of my own life. Tomorrow I was going to trick him into using a key to let me back in. And once that box was open, once I had the proof and the access to the funds, I would not just take back my money. I would take his future. Box 404 was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. The apartment Sarah was renting was a tiny studio above a laundromat that smelled perpetually of fabric softener and stale cigarettes. It was a far cry from the suburban comfort I had built for my family, but right now it was the war room for the most important battle of my life. I sat in a rusted metal folding chair in the center of the room with a towel draped around my shoulders, while Sarah mixed a bowl of jet black hair dye. The chemical smell stung my nose, reminding me of the epoxy I used to use to seal concrete cracks. In a way, that was exactly what we were doing. We were filling in the cracks of my identity, sealing away the broken old man so something harder could take his place. "You have to sit still, Vic," Sarah said, her voice steady and focused. "If I get this on your skin, you will look like a chimney sweep, not a billionaire." I closed my eyes and let her work. The cold goop touched my scalp and I flinched. For 15 years I had let my hair go gray. I had worn it as a badge of honor, a sign of the wisdom I thought I had earned. But there was no wisdom in being a victim. As Sarah combed the color through my hair, I felt like I was washing away the years of naivety. The years of believing my wife loved me. The years of trusting a son who saw me as nothing more than an ATM. When she was done with my hair, she handed me a razor. "The beard goes," she said. "Arthur King does not hide behind a beard. He wants the world to see his face because he owns it." I walked to the small cracked mirror above the sink. The man staring back at me looked tired. His eyes were red-rimmed and his skin was pale. I raised the razor. The first stroke took off a patch of white stubble, revealing the jawline underneath. I had not seen my chin in a decade. I kept scraping away the hair, watching the foam turn gray in the sink. With every stroke, I felt lighter. I was carving Victor Sullivan out of existence. The man who apologized for taking up space was gone. In his place, a stranger was emerging. A man with a sharp jaw and cold eyes. A man who looked like he could fire 1,000 people without blinking. While the die set, Sarah pulled a garment bag from the closet. She unzipped it with a flourish, revealing a navy blue suit. It was not new. I could see the slight shine on the elbows that came from wear, but the fabric was rich and heavy. Italian wool. "I found it at the Goodwill on 4th Street, she said, smoothing the lapel. "It was $20. "But look at the stitching, Vic. This is a Brioni. Knew this would cost $5,000. Some rich guy probably died and his kids donated it without knowing what it was." "Kind of fits the theme," I said dryly. "A dead man's suit for a dead man." I put it on. It was tight in the shoulders. I had spent my life lifting lumber and bags of cement, so my upper body was broader than the average executive's. Sarah produced a sewing kit from her shy bag. She didn't measure. She just pinned and tucked, moving around me with the efficiency of a seamstress. "Hold your breath," she commanded. I inhaled. She tightened the waist of the trousers, taking them in to fit my frame. She let out the hem of the jacket sleeves just a fraction of an inch. "You have good posture," she noted, stepping back to admire her work. Most guys your age are hunched over from sitting at desks. You stand like a soldier. I stand like a man who has spent 40 years on his feet, I corrected her. When she was finished, I looked in the mirror again. I gasped. The man in the reflection was not a construction foreman. The black hair took 10 years off my face. The suit fit like armor, enhancing my broad shoulders and commanding presence. I didn't look like I poured concrete. I looked like I owned the company that bought the concrete. Now for the backstory, Sarah said, sitting down at her laptop. She pulled up a document she had been working on. Your name is Arthur King, she began reciting the details we had agreed upon. You are a private equity investor based in Cape Town, South Africa. You made your fortune in industrial diamonds in the 80s. That explains why there is very little digital footprint for you before the internet era. You are old money, quiet money. You do not have a LinkedIn profile because you do not need one. People come to you. South Africa, I repeated, testing the words. Why there? Because it is far away, Sarah said. And banking records there are notoriously hard to verify quickly, especially if we claim your assets are held in family trusts. Douglas won't have time to run a full background check before Friday. He will see the suit. He will hear the accent, and his greed will fill in the blanks. I do not have a South African accent, I pointed out. You do not need one, Sarah said. You just need to speak less. Arthur King is a man of few words. He is bored. He is arrogant. When you speak slowly and clearly, like you are explaining things to a child. And if Douglas asks a specific question, you do not answer it. You ask him a question back. You dominate the conversation, Vic. You do not participate in it. I nodded, practicing the look in the mirror. A slight tilt of the head, a narrowing of the eyes. I channeled the most arrogant architects I had ever worked with, the ones who looked at my blueprints and sneered. I knew exactly how to play a man who thought he was God. Now for the bait, Sarah said, cracking her knuckles. She opened an encrypted email client. She had created a domain name that sounded impressive. KingHoldingsGlobal.com. She began to type, reading aloud as she went. Subject, strictly confidential. Acquisition inquiry. Dear Mr. Thorne, I represent a private consortium looking to acquire distressed financial assets in the Midwest region prior to the end of the fiscal quarter. We have been monitoring the upcoming merger of First National, and we believe there are specific off-book opportunities that would be mutually beneficial. I am in the city for 24 hours. I am looking to deploy $50 million in capital immediately. If you are interested in a discreet conversation regarding your high-yield portfolio, reply to this secure channel. Arthur King. $50 million. I whistled. You think he will believe that? Sarah hit send. He has to believe it, Vic. I saw his books, remember. He is underwater. The merger with Omnicorp is a Hail Mary, but the auditors are breathing down his neck. If he can bring in a $50 million client right before the sale, his stock options will double. He is not looking for truth right now. He is looking for a miracle. We sat there in the silence of the small apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The waiting was the hardest part. My heart was pounding against the silk lining of the suit. If Douglas ignored the email, or if he ran a check and found out the domain was registered an hour ago, it was all over. We would be two crazy people in a cheap apartment with nothing but a stolen truck and a dream. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I started to pace the small room, my new shoes clicking on the linoleum. He is not going to answer, I said, stopping by the window. He probably thinks it is spam. Wait, Sarah said, holding up a hand. A soft ping echoed from the laptop. Sarah grabbed the mouse, her eyes scanning the screen. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. He did not just answer, she whispered. He bit the hook, line, and sinker. She turned the screen toward me. Mr. King, Thank you for your inquiry. While we are in a quiet period regarding the merger, I would be happy to discuss potential private placement opportunities for a client of your stature. I can clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. Would 9 a.m. at the main branch be convenient for you? Regards, Douglas Thorne. 9 a.m. I said, checking my watch. That is 6 hours from now. Sarah closed the laptop. Then you better get some rest, Arthur, she said. You have a bank to buy in the morning. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, Douglas was probably celebrating, thinking he had found another pigeon to pluck. He had no idea that the man coming to shake his hand was the same man he had left to rot in a nursing home. I adjusted my cuffs, feeling the weight of the gold watch Sarah had borrowed from her friend. It was fake, but it looked real. Just like Arthur King. I am ready, I said to the reflection in the glass. The old Victor Sullivan might have been afraid. He might have hesitated. But Arthur King felt no fear. He only felt the cold, hard anticipation of the hunt. I turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. The game was on, and I was holding all the aces. The rain had stopped by the time we pulled up to the bank, but the streets were still slick and gray. I sat in the back of a rented town car that Sarah had secured with the last of her savings. She was in the front seat, dressed as my executive assistant, tapping away on a tablet, but I was barely aware of her. My focus was entirely on the building in front of me. I had poured the foundation for this bank 30 years ago. I knew how deep the pylons went, and I knew exactly where the stress fractures were hiding in the concrete. Today, I was going to be the stress fracture that brought the whole structure down. I adjusted the cuffs of my Italian suit and checked my reflection in the window one last time. Victor Sullivan, the construction worker, was gone. In his place sat Arthur King, a man who looked like he could buy and sell souls before breakfast. I grabbed the heavy metal briefcase by my feet. It was filled with nothing but old phone books and a layer of cut glass on top, but it felt heavy enough to crush a man's skull. Let us go, I said, my voice low and steady. And remember, Sarah, do not speak unless I ask you to. You are the help. I am the power. We walked through the revolving doors, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It smelled of floor wax and stale air conditioning, the same smell that had greeted me when I was dragged out in handcuffs just yesterday. The security guard, the same one who had twisted my arm behind my back, was standing by the podium. He looked at me, and for a second I felt a spike of adrenaline. But his eyes just slid over me. He did not see the desperate old man in the cheap suit. He saw the Brioni jacket and the arrogant set of my jaw, and he nodded respectfully. That was the first lesson of the day. People do not see you. They see what you want them to see. Douglas Thorne was waiting for us in the middle of the lobby. He looked nervous. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house, but he wore it like a costume. He was sweating slightly at the temples. He saw me and pasted on a wide, predatory smile, rushing forward with his hand extended. Mr. King, he gushed. Welcome to First National. I am Douglas Thorne. It is an honor to finally meet you. I stopped walking. I did not take his hand. I just looked at it, then looked at his face with an expression of mild distaste. I let the silence stretch out for 5 uncomfortable seconds. I wanted him off balance. I wanted him to feel small. Is it, I asked, my voice bored and accented with a vague transatlantic clip. Is it an honor, Mr. Thorne? Or is it just a relief that someone is finally here to look at your distressed assets? Douglas pulled his hand back, his smile faltering for a microsecond before he recovered. Well, business is business, Mr. King, he said with a nervous chuckle. Please come this way. We have coffee and pastries prepared in the conference room. I looked around the lobby, letting my gaze linger on the faded carpet and the tellers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. I did not fly 19 hours from Cape Town for pastries, Mr. Thorne, I said. And frankly, this lobby is depressing. It smells of mediocrity. If I acquire this institution, the first thing I will do is gut this entire floor. It lacks vision. Douglas swallowed hard. He was not used to being talked to like this in his own kingdom, but the greed in his eyes was stronger than his pride. He nodded quickly. Of course, a renovation would be top of the list. But let us discuss the portfolio. I have the files ready. I held up a hand, stopping him. Files are for accountants, I said, gesturing vaguely at Sarah. My assistant will look at your numbers later. I am here for something else. I lifted the briefcase slightly. The handcuffs connecting it to my wrist rattled. I am carrying $50 million in uncut industrial diamonds, Mr. Thorne. They are the collateral for my initial deposit. I do not trust paper. I trust carbon and pressure. And before I sign a single document, I need to know that your facility is capable of holding them. Douglas stared at the case, his eyes widening. 50 million. He did not doubt it for a second. He was so desperate for capital that he would have believed me if I said I had moon rocks in there. Our vault is state-of-the-art, he stammered. Biometric scanners, reinforced steel. It is impenetrable. Show me, I commanded. He hesitated. Accessing the vault usually required paperwork and security clearance, but I was not giving him time to think. I stepped closer into his personal space, using my height to tower over him. Unless you are telling me your security is not up to standard, I said, in which case I can take my business to the Chase branch across the street. I hear their vault is quite impressive. No, that is not necessary, Douglas said quickly. Please follow me. He led us past the teller line toward the secure elevator. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my face frozen in a mask of indifference. We were walking the same path he had walked with Lorraine every Thursday. I watched the back of his neck. I wanted to strangle him right there. I wanted to scream at him for stealing my life, but I forced the rage down into my gut and turned it into fuel. We stepped into the elevator. Douglas swiped his keycard. The doors closed, sealing us in. So Mr. King, Douglas said, trying to fill the silence. What brings you to the Midwest? It is a long way from South Africa. Opportunities, I said, staring at the floor indicator as it lit up for the basement. I like things that are broken, Mr. Thorne. They are cheap to buy and easy to fix if you have the right tools. And from what I hear, your bank is very broken. The elevator dinged and the doors opened. The air in the basement was cool and dry. We walked down a long corridor lined with white tiles until we reached the massive circular door of the high net worth vault. This is it, Douglas said, punching a code into the keypad. The finest security money can buy. The heavy door swung open on silent hinges. We stepped inside. The room was exactly as I had seen it on the security footage. Walls of steel lockers gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was quiet. A tomb for money. I walked down the rows, running my hand along the metal faces of the boxes. I acted like I was inspecting the finish, checking for dust. It is small, I remarked, but adequate. I walked slowly, counting the numbers in my head. 400. 401. 402. I stopped in front of the large box at the end of the row. Box 404. I tapped it with my knuckle. It made a hollow sound. This one, I said. I want this one. Douglas froze. He was standing by the entrance and his face went pale. I beg your pardon, he asked. This box, I said, pointing to the gold numbers. 404. In my business, we are very particular about numbers, Mr. Thorne. 4 represents stability, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 pillars of strength, and the 0 in the middle that is the circle of life. I want my diamonds in this box. Douglas walked over, wiping his hands on his trousers. I am afraid that is impossible, Mr. King, he said, his voice tight. That box is currently occupied. Occupied, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. By whom? A former client. Douglas stammered. She passed away recently. The estate is still in probate. We cannot access it. I laughed. A cold, sharp bark of a laugh that echoed off the steel walls. You are telling me that a dead woman is occupying prime real estate in your vault, I asked. Dead people do not need security, Mr. Thorne. They need a shovel. I turned to face him, fully swinging the briefcase so it hit my leg with a solid thud. I am offering to deposit $50 million into your bank today. Right now. But I am a superstitious man. I need to know that my assets are starting their journey in a place of balance. I want box 404. Mr. King, please, Douglas pleaded. I have box 405 available right next to it. It is the same size. I do not want 405, I snapped. 5 is chaos. I want 404. I stepped closer to him, dropping my voice to a whisper. Tell you what, I will pay you for the inconvenience. What is the annual rental fee for a box this size? $5,000. Douglas nodded mute. I will pay you $50,000, I said. Cash. Today. Just to evict the ghost and give me the space. Douglas looked at the box, then back at me. I could see the gears turning in his head. $50,000 was nothing compared to the $50 million I was promising, but it was immediate. And more importantly, he wanted to close this deal. He looked at the box with hatred. He wanted Lorraine gone, too. He wanted to bury her memory just as much as he wanted my money. It is highly irregular, he said, his resistance crumbling. I checked my watch. I have a meeting with your competitors in 45 minutes, Mr. Thorne. I am losing patience. Open the box. Let me see if it is big enough for my shipment. If it fits, I sign the papers. If not, I walk. He looked at the sweat on his upper lip. He looked at the briefcase. He looked at the box. Fine, he whispered. He reached into his jacket pocket. My heart stopped. He pulled out the long brass guard key, but then he hesitated. I only have the bank's key, he said. The client key is missing. We would have to drill it. I shook my head. Drilling takes too long, and it is messy. Are you telling me that the director of the bank does not have a master override key for emergencies? Douglas stiffened. That is a restricted item, Mr. King. I am a restricted client, I shot back. Do you want the $50 million or not? Douglas closed his eyes for a second. He was trapped. Trapped by his own greed. Trapped by the lie he had lived for 40 years. He let out a long, defeated sigh. Wait here, he said. He walked to a small panel on the far wall hidden behind a fire extinguisher. He punched in a separate code. A small drawer popped open. He reached in and pulled out a heavy red key. The master override. I watched him walk back toward box 404. My hands were trembling, but I clenched them into fists to hide it. This was it. The moment of truth. He inserted the brass key. Then he inserted the red key. He turned them both. Click. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the silence of the vault. The heavy steel door of box 404 swung open. There, Douglas said, stepping back. It is open. You can check the dimensions. I did not move immediately. I stared into the dark, rectangular space. It was not empty. There was a metal container inside, and next to it, a thick stack of files. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my ears. Excellent, I said softly. I reached out not for the empty space, but for the metal container. What are you doing? Douglas asked, stepping forward. That is personal property. You cannot touch that. I turned to him, and for the first time I let the mask slip. I let Arthur King fade away, and I let Victor Sullivan step back into the light. I looked him dead in the eye and smiled a smile that did not reach my eyes. "I think I have the right, Douglas," I said, my voice dropping to its natural, gravelly tone. "After all, I paid for it. Every single Thursday for 40 years. Douglas froze. His eyes went wide. He looked at my face, really looked at it for the first time. He looked past the dye and the suit and the shave. And he saw the ghost. "Vic," he whispered. "Surprise," I said. And then I grabbed the metal container and slammed it onto the inspection table. It was time to see what my wife had been hiding in the dark. I stared at the contents of Box 404, and for a moment the world stopped spinning. I had expected cash. I had expected blackmail photos. I had expected deeds to illegal properties. But there was nothing like that. Just a small ceramic urn, no bigger than a coffee mug, painted a soft baby blue, and a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. Douglas frowned, his greed momentarily replaced by confusion. He reached for the urn, but I was faster. I grabbed it, my gloved hands shaking not from age but from a sudden terrifying premonition. The urn was heavy for its size. I turned it over. On the bottom, scrawled in black marker, was a name and a date. Preston Sullivan, 1984. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I had to grip the edge of the inspection table to keep from falling. 1984. That was the year my son was born. The year Lorraine and I brought our baby boy home from the hospital. But the date was not a birth date. It was a death date. I looked at Douglas. He was staring at the urn, and his face had gone ashen. He knew. He knew exactly what this was. "What is this, Douglas?" I asked, my voice dropping the Arthur King accent entirely. "Who is in this jar?" Douglas took a step back, his back hitting the wall of safety deposit boxes. He looked like a trapped rat. "I do not know," he stammered. "It must be a mistake. Lorraine never told me." I slammed the urn down on the metal table. The sound rang out like a gunshot. "Do not lie to me," I roared. 1984. My son is 40 years old. He is upstairs right now preparing to sell this bank. So tell me, Douglas, who is inside this urn. I ripped open the manila envelope. Papers spilled out. Medical records, a death certificate, and an adoption decree. I snatched up the death certificate. The name was Preston Sullivan. Cause of death: sudden infant death syndrome. Date of death, November 12, 1984, 3 months after he was born. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal howl of agony that threatened to tear me apart. My son. My real son. He had died in his crib while I was working a double shift to pay for his nursery. And Lorraine. What had she done? I grabbed the next document. An adoption record dated 2 days after the death certificate. It authorized the emergency placement of a male infant from the St. Jude's Home for Unwed Mothers. The biological mother was listed as Jane Doe. The biological father. I looked at the name. Douglas Thorne. I looked up at the man standing before me. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a wrecking ball, shattering the last remnants of my sanity. Lorraine had not just stolen my money. She had stolen my grief. When our baby died, she did not tell me. She knew I would fall apart. She knew I might stop working, stop providing. So she buried our son. She cremated him and hid him in a box. And then she replaced him. She replaced my flesh and blood with the bastard son of her lover. "You sick son of a bitch," I whispered. Douglas held up his hands, trembling. "Vic, listen to me. It was not like that. Lorraine was desperate. She lost the baby and she was afraid you would leave her. She knew I had a child, a mistake from a college relationship that I could not keep. It was a solution, Vic, a perfect solution. We gave you a son. We gave you a family. You gave me a lie," I shouted, throwing the papers at him. You let me raise your son. You let me work myself to the bone to feed him, clothe him, send him to college. And all the while you and Lorraine were laughing at me. You were using my money to raise your child while my real son sat in a jar in a dark vault for 40 years. I thought about the boy I had raised, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I was so proud of. He was never mine. That explained the coldness. That explained why he looked at me with such disdain. He was Douglas's son, Liss's. He had Douglas's blood. He had Douglas's greed. And Preston, the man upstairs. Does he know? I asked. Douglas nodded slowly. He knows. Lorraine told him when he turned 18. That is why he hates you, Vic. He knows you are not his father. He knows you are just the mark. I fell back against the steel lockers, clutching the urn to my chest. Tears streamed down my face, ruining the expensive makeup Sarah had applied. I wept for the baby I never got to mourn. I wept for the 40 years of love I had poured into a stranger. I wept for the sheer cruelty of it all. To replace a dead child like a broken appliance. To turn a tragedy into a long con. It was evil. Pure, unadulterated evil. But as the tears fell, the fire inside me began to change. It turned from red-hot rage to something colder, something harder. Steel. I wiped my face with the sleeve of the Brioni suit. I looked at Douglas, who was eyeing the door, calculating his escape. You think this is over? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. You think because I am a ghost, I cannot touch you? I walked over to the open box. I reached inside and pulled out the rest of the file. There were bank statements, transfers, proof that the money Lorraine stole from me was used to pay off the mother of Douglas's child. Proof that my sweat and blood had paid for his silence. I turned to the biometric scanner on the wall, the one that controlled the vault's main server. Access the transfer terminal, I commanded. Douglas shook his head. I cannot, Vic. The merger? Open it, I yelled, grabbing him by the lapels of his jacket and slamming him against the panel. Open it, or I will walk upstairs with this urn and these papers, and I will introduce myself to the investors from Omnicorp. I will tell them that their new partner is a baby stealing money-laundering fraud. Douglas whimpered. He raised his hand and pressed his thumb against the scanner. Access granted. A keyboard slid out from the wall. I pulled Sarah's flash drive from my pocket. Insert this, I said. Douglas hesitated, but I pressed the sharp edge of the urn against his throat. He plugged it in. The screen flickered. Sarah's code took over. It bypassed the bank's firewall and went straight to the pending transfers. The $3.2 million sitting in the Cayman account, ready to vanish. Type in this routing number, I said, reciting the number of the Police Benevolent Association Fund Sarah and I had agreed on. We were not keeping the money. It was dirty. It was stained with lies. We were donating it. All of it. Except for enough to buy a small plot in the cemetery for the urn I was holding. Douglas typed the numbers, his hands shaking so bad he hit the wrong key twice. Authorize the transfer, I ordered. He pressed enter. Transaction complete. I pulled the flash drive out. I looked at Douglas, who was sliding down the wall, weeping into his hands. He was ruined. The money was gone. The merger would fail. And he was about to go to prison for a very long time. I picked up the urn. I am taking my son home, I said softly. The real one. I walked out of the vault, leaving Douglas Thorne in the wreckage of his life. I stepped into the elevator, and as the doors closed, I looked down at the blue ceramic jar. I am sorry I missed your life, son, I whispered, but I promise you, I will not miss your justice. The elevator rose, carrying me back to the surface, back to the world of the living. But I was not Arthur King anymore, and I was not the old Victor Sullivan. I was a father on a warpath, and there was one more person I needed to face. The imposter upstairs, The man who wore my name but had his father's black heart. The final act was about to begin. The grand ballroom on the top floor of the bank building was a sea of black tuxedos and sparkling evening gowns. The air smelled of expensive champagne and the kind of desperate greed that only exists in rooms where millions of dollars are changing hands. I stood at the back of the room near the heavy velvet curtains watching Douglas Thorne hold court on the stage. He looked triumphant. His face was flushed with adrenaline and alcohol, and he was gripping the podium like a captain steering a ship through a storm. Beside him stood Preston, looking every inch the young heir apparent in a bespoke suit that cost more than my first truck. They were smiling. They were shaking hands with the executives from Omnicorp. They were 5 minutes away from signing the deal that would wash away their crimes and bury my existence forever. I adjusted the microphone pack hidden under my jacket. In the tech booth high above the crowd, I saw a flash of light. It was Sarah. She gave me a thumbs up. She had bypassed the hotel's secure server and taken control of the main projection system. The stage was set. The players were in position. It was time for the final act. I walked down the center aisle. I did not hurry. I moved with the slow, deliberate weight of a man carrying a tombstone. The sound of my shoes on the marble floor cut through the murmur of the crowd. Heads turned. People whispered. They saw Arthur King, the eccentric diamond investor who was rumored to be saving the bank. Douglas saw me coming, and his smile widened. He waved me forward, thinking I was there to publicly endorse the sale. "Ladies and gentlemen," Douglas announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "Please welcome our newest strategic partner, Mr. Arthur King from Cape Town. His investment has secured the future of this institution." Applause broke out, polite and rhythmic. Preston clapped the loudest, looking at me with a mixture of relief and arrogance. I climbed the steps to the stage. The lights were blinding. I took the microphone from Douglas's hand. He tried to lean in to whisper something, probably a thank you or a reminder of the deal, but I stepped away from him. I looked out at the sea of faces. Bankers, lawyers, investors, the pillars of society. And I looked at my son, the boy I had raised. I let the silence stretch. I let it grow heavy and uncomfortable until the applause died down, and the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. "My name is not Arthur King," I said. My voice was calm. It was not the accented voice of the billionaire. It was the gravelly voice of the construction worker. Douglas froze. His smile faltered. "My name," I continued, looking directly at Preston, "is Victor Sullivan, and I am not here to invest. I am here to foreclose." A ripple of confusion went through the room. Preston stepped forward, his face twisting into a sneer. He laughed, a dry, nervous sound that echoed too loudly. "Okay, very funny," he said, grabbing my arm. "I apologize, everyone. My father is not well. He has dementia. He escaped from his care facility this morning. He thinks he is a billionaire." He signaled to the security guards by the doors. "Get him out of here," Preston snapped. "And call the asylum. Tell them their patient is disturbing the peace." The guards started to move toward the stage. The investors began to murmur nervously, checking their watches and their phones. Douglas moved to grab the microphone back, his face pale and sweating. "Please forgive the interruption," he stammered. "A family tragedy. Very sad. If we could just—" "Now, Sarah," I said into the microphone. The massive screen behind us, which had been displaying graphs of projected profits, flickered. The image of the rising stock arrow vanished. In its place, a high-resolution scan appeared. It was stark and brutal in its simplicity. A death certificate. The room went deadly silent. The text on the screen was magnified so everyone could read it. Name: Preston Sullivan. Date of birth: August 14th, 1984. Date of death: November 12th, 1984. Preston stopped laughing. He looked at the screen, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What is this?" he whispered. I walked over to him. I looked into the eyes that I had looked into for 40 years. The eyes I thought were mine. "You called me crazy, Preston," I said, my voice booming through the hall. "You said I was confused, but I am the only one here who knows the truth. You said I was a ghost, but I am not the ghost's son, you are." I pointed at the screen. "Preston Sullivan died of sudden infant death syndrome when he was 3 months old. I buried him in my heart, but your mother buried him in a safety deposit box. She kept his ashes in a jar to hide her failure, and then she replaced him." I signaled Sarah again. The image on the screen changed. This time it was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was a DNA test report, dated today, showing a 0% match between Victor Sullivan and the man standing on stage. On the right was an adoption decree from St. Jude's Home for Unwed Mothers. The crowd gasped. I heard chairs scraping as people stood up to get a better look. The executives from Omnicorp were whispering furiously to their lawyers. Douglas lunged for me, trying to cover the microphone. "Stop it," he screamed. "It is a lie. It is all a forgery." I shoved him back. I was 72 years old, but I had spent my life lifting steel. Douglas hit the floor hard. "And who did she replace my son with?" I asked, turning back to the crowd. "Who is this man who stole my name and my money and my love?" I looked at Preston. He was trembling now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified look of a child who has been caught. "She went to the man she was really sleeping with," I said. "She went to the man who helped her launder my money for 40 years. The screen changed one last time. It showed a birth certificate. Name of child, Eric Thorne. Father, Douglas Thorne. Mother, Jane Doe. The room exploded. The sound of shock was like a physical wave. People were shouting. Flashbulbs started popping as reporters who were there to cover the sale realized they had stumbled onto the scandal of the decade. I walked up to Preston. "No." I walked up to Eric. "I raised you," I said, my voice cracking with the weight of the betrayal. "I taught you to tie your shoes. I sat up with you when you had a fever. I paid for your college. I loved you. God help me, I loved you more than my own life." Eric stared at me, tears streaming down his face. He looked at Douglas, who was still on the floor, trying to crawl away. And all this time I continued, "You knew. You knew you were living a lie. You knew I was just the mark. You called me dad to my face and laughed at me behind my back with your real father." I turned to the crowd. "This man," I said, pointing at Douglas, "is not selling a bank. He is selling a crime scene. He has been washing money through fake construction companies under my name for decades. And when I tried to withdraw my own savings to bury my wife, he declared me dead to cover his tracks." I pulled the death certificate Douglas had shown me at the bank out of my pocket and held it up. "He says I am dead," I roared. "Does this look like a dead man to you?" The chaos was absolute. The Omnicorp executives were storming out, shouting at their assistants to kill the deal. The security guards who had been coming to arrest me were now looking at Douglas with suspicion. The illusion of power had shattered. Eric looked at Douglas, then at the screen, then at me. "Dad," he whimpered, reaching out a hand. "I mean, Vic, wait. I can explain. Mom said it was the only way. She said you would not understand." I looked at his hand, the hand I had held 1,000 times, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The grief was gone. There was just a cold, empty space where my son used to be. "My son is dead," Eric, I said softly, so only he could hear. "And as of this moment, so are you." I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a thud that resonated through the speakers like a gavel striking a sounding block. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the stairs, not as a victim, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had burned his own house down to kill the rats inside. Behind me, I heard the wail of sirens approaching. Sarah had timed it perfectly. The FBI was in the lobby. The show was over. But as I walked through the parting crowd of stunned millionaires, I knew my journey was not finished. There was one more thing I had to do. One more debt to pay. And it was not to the bank. It was to the boy in the blue jar. The chaos in the ballroom did not last long. It was replaced by the cold, hard reality of federal law. I stood on the stage and watched as the agents swarmed the room. They moved with a precision that reminded me of a demolition crew planting charges. They knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were. Douglas Thorne was pulled from the floor, his expensive tuxedo ruined by the dust of the stage he had tried to rule. He was screaming about his rights, about his lawyers, about his connections, but the agents simply spun him around and clamped the handcuffs onto his wrists. The sound of that ratcheting metal was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of a 40-year lock finally breaking open. Eric, the boy who had worn my son's name like a stolen coat, did not fight. He collapsed into a chair, weeping into his hands. When the agents pulled him up, he looked at me one last time. His eyes were pleading, searching for the father he had deceived for decades. But I did not look away. I did not soften. I let him see exactly what he had created. A stranger. A man who had been hollowed out by lies until there was nothing left but concrete and steel. As they marched him past me, I saw the realization hit him. He was not losing a father. He was realizing he never had one. Douglas had used him just as he had used me. We were both just tools in a con man's toolbox, and now we were all broken. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions and courtrooms. The story of the dead man who came back to life to expose a banking empire became a national sensation. Reporters camped out on the lawn of the house I used to own. But I did not stay there. I stayed with Sarah in her small apartment, sleeping on the couch, while she orchestrated the legal slaughter of Douglas Thorne. The day of the final ruling, the courtroom was packed. I wore my old suit, not the Brioni. I wanted the judge to see Victor Sullivan, the construction worker, not Arthur King, the illusion. The judge was a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked at the mountain of evidence Sarah had compiled. The ledger, the DNA tests, the smurfing records. She struck her gavel and the sound echoed like a thunderclap. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, looking down at me, "the court finds that you have been the victim of one of the most egregious cases of identity fraud and financial abuse in the history of this state." She signed the order restoring my legal status. I was no longer a ghost. I was a citizen. I was alive. But the real justice came in the sentencing. Because Douglas had used my name to set up his shell companies, and because he had used my money to capitalize them, the court ruled that under the forfeiture laws, the assets of those companies did not belong to the bank. They belonged to the registered owner. Me. Douglas had been so arrogant, so sure that I would stay dead, that he had inadvertently built his entire fortune in my name. The judge stripped him of everything. His stock, his properties, his offshore accounts. It was all transferred to the victim as restitution. I walked out of that courthouse not just a free man, but a wealthy one. But the money did not matter. What mattered was the look on Douglas's face as the bailiff led him away to begin a 20-year sentence. He looked at me, and for the first time in 40 years, he did not look down on me. He looked afraid. A month later, I pulled into the parking lot of the First National Bank. The sign out front was being changed. The Omnicorp deal was dead. The bank was under new management. I was driving a brand new Ford F-150. It was deep blue, the color of the ocean I had never seen. It had heated seats and an engine that purred like a lion. It was the first thing I had ever bought just for myself. Sarah was waiting for me by the entrance. She was wearing a tailored suit, and she looked every inch the chief executive officer she now was. I had used my controlling interest to install her as the head of the restructuring committee. She was going to clean that place up. She was going to make sure no one ever used that vault to hide a crime again. I rolled down the window. The autumn air was crisp and smelled of burning leaves. "You look good, boss," I said, smiling at her. She laughed, a genuine, happy sound that made her look 10 years younger. "I am just holding the fort, Vic," she said. "It is your bank." I shook my head. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key ring. The master keys to the building, the keys to the vault. "No, Sarah," I said, handing them to her. "I do not want to be a banker. I spent 40 years building cages for other people. I am done with walls." She took the keys, her eyes filling with tears. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Where will you go?" I looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip below the city skyline, painting the clouds in shades of purple and gold. I thought about the urn sitting on the passenger seat beside me. I was taking my son to the ocean. I was going to scatter him in the waves so he could finally be free. And then I was going to keep driving. "I have built homes for other people my whole life, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Now I am going to go build my own. Not a house, a life." I put the truck in gear. "Take care of them, Sarah. Watch the numbers, and never let them forget the Thursday deception." "I will," she promised. I tapped the gas, and the big truck rolled forward. I did not look back at the bank. I did not look back at the city that had been my prison. I watched the road stretching out before me. For the first time in a long time, the road did not end at a construction site or a nursing home. It went on forever. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. It felt cold. It felt real. It felt like life. The ice that had encased my heart for so many years was finally melting. I was Victor Sullivan. I was 72 years old, and my life was just beginning. And as I drove toward the setting sun, I realized something. They had tried to freeze me out, but winter does not last forever. Eventually, the spring comes, and when it does, it is beautiful. This story is a reminder to every single one of you watching. We often think that the people we love are incapable of hurting us. We blind ourselves with loyalty, and we silence our gut instincts because we are afraid of the truth. But financial abuse is real. Identity theft happens in the bedroom, not just on the internet. If something feels wrong in your marriage or your family, do not ignore it. Do not let anyone tell you that you are crazy for asking questions about your own money and your own life. Trust is precious, but verification is survival. You are the only person who can truly protect your future, so never hand the keys to your existence to someone else, no matter how much you love them. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If Victor's story moved you or made you want to check your own bank accounts, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to know where you are watching from, so drop your city and country in the comments below. And tell me, if you were Victor, would you have given the money to Sarah or kept the bank for yourself? Let us talk in the comments. Until next time, stay safe, stay alert, and never let anyone write your story for you.